what if your hair journey is also a healing journey? How does hair affect how you see yourself? Does your hair type affect how people perceive you? Today, we are going on a different kind of journey with our natural hair. One that's just as emotional as it is insightful. We're sitting down with someone people are curious about, love their services, but often don't know how to approach. A therapist. But don't worry, she's not here to psychoanalyze your hair. Instead, we are exploring the roots of how your hair reflects who you are, why it holds so much meaning, and how shifting our perspective on it can change the way we see ourselves. Sit back and enjoy. Hi, Sister Summayyah. Welcome to Unraveling the Knots. It's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for taking out time to educate women and natural hair lovers about the ties between their hair and their emotional state. For those listening, can you tell them who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Ghania. Thank you for having me on your beautiful show. I was really looking forward to getting to be part of this effort of yours. My name is Summayyah Ojibara-Sadiq Ojibara. I'm a psychotherapist, counselor, and writer, amongst other things.
Awesome. And I've known you for a minute. You're a phenomenal human being. Just to add that note. Thanks. How did you get into therapy? And when did you realize your love for natural hair?
It's interesting that you put those two questions together because one invites the reflection on the journey that I have taken to arrive at this place in my life. And the other one also invites reflection in a different direction as well. I've always been interested in human nature, human behavior, because I didn't know that's what it was at the time. And I've told the story severally where in my secondary school, just as we're finishing, we're exchanging notes and one of the notes people told me often was, oh, you need to mind your own business. Stop being so interested in other people. And at the time, I thought it was more of a criticism of my inability to stay out of people's business. But as I grew and got to learn more about myself, I realized that fundamentally, I've always been drawn to wanting to navigate life with people, share their stories, journey with them, help where I'm able to. And I went in that direction in many different ways, whether it was in writing or in running programs before I became formally trained. Now, when you ask me about when I became interested or how was it you put the question in natural hair, that's a long story. I don't think we could even finish telling that today, but I'll give the shortest version as much as I can do. And that is, I believe it intersected with my decision as a Muslim woman to start covering my hair, which was very interesting because up until that moment, yes, so up until that moment, I had worn my hair in many different ways. And when I was in my early 20s, about the time that I made that decision to start using the hijab, even though I was brought up in a Muslim home and we were generally brought up to dress modestly according to the requirements of Islam. But the personal decision to cover my hair also intersected with the period of time when I started thinking about natural hair, although I didn't do anything about it until many years later. So, and it was only because I just decided that I wasn't going to keep relaxing my hair and wearing it in many other different ways. I had been taught to wear it from when I was very young.
Wow, that's interesting. Have you experienced women, either in professional or personal circles, who are impacted by their hair, natural or not?
So if I respond to that question from my own personal experience, I know that it was very hard for me to even consider doing anything with my hair that was different from what I'd always done, which was to wear it with the many different styles, but to now cover it, that was very significant. And when I look at my own personal experience and I look at, so many experiences of women and what we come across, and men, interestingly,
yes,
when it has to do with relationships, yes, and men,
Yeah.
I see that is directly tied to a sense of self and identity. And when you're in places and positions where some of your sense of stability becomes questioned, your identities are constantly under some sort of micro vigilance, hypervigilance, some need for one to comply, it becomes a means of resistance to many women. So when it has to do with workplaces, which is one of the places where we spend a significant amount of our lives in, then of course, when you're talking about hair, it is directly tied to many things: sense of identity, wellness, well-being, a sense of belonging. It's quite multifaceted, really.
Hair is more than hair.
Yes, truly.
My next question for you is, how do you think societal beauty standards impact people's view of natural hair?
So if we have a quick trip down history, we will realize that the natural hair for Black women took prominence, took center stage about the 60s, 90s, 60s, 70s. And it was about that time there was some sort of revolution that was happening at the time, where people were feeling a need to reconnect back to their roots, their identities, their culture, and a form of resistance to Eurocentric standards of beauty. And when we're talking about standards of beauty, most of the time, these are shaped by Eurocentric expectations, standards. Many people are still in the process, including myself, where we're trying to decolonize a lot of our thinking, our being, our doing, our interactions. And so hair is a primary source of identity that informs identity. So to that extent, of course, when you're talking about societal standards and when it is informed by Eurocentric standard, that means it impacts on everything. How I wear my hair becomes a currency for how I am received, how I'm accepted, how I'm engaged with. And what also happens is that it becomes that social currency to gain entry into places. So of course, when you're talking about beauty standards, once you don't comply with what societal expectations are within the spaces that you're in, then you're on the outside.
You mentioned that the 60s, 70s, there was this sense of resistance when it came to Black women embracing their natural hair. How do you think that has changed over time, especially when you think about today? Are people still resisting, or do you think like there's more acceptance when it comes to beauty standards that reflect our natural hair type?
Fashion trends are quite cyclical. So you have things that we did when we were young, or we saw being done when we were young, now coming back. So there's always this constant cycle that happens. However, when we think about how fashion is directly tied to a lot of world events, how if you think about certain things that are historically being major issues that are happening in the world, and you see how that informs our perception of self, our decisions about how we express ourselves, and how that shows up in our interpersonal relationships. What that now starts to show is those changes that happen. So what I've observed, which is quite interesting, I watch quite a lot of movies, and I noticed that in some of our movies from particularly, let's say, African countries, Nigerian movies, and just a range of movies, American movies, we see that what is happening is there seems to be this interesting intersection, or should we say fusion, between wearing our hair and wearing wigs and weave-ons.
Yeah.
So I see people actually, interestingly, they'd have cornrows, which is their natural hair, that the hair is not relaxed, and then they wear wigs that make them look like, if you like, a mix between a black woman and a Caucasian person or an Asian person, depending on the style, whether it's in very heavy curls or, if you like, long straightened hair. Now, when we were young, my mother used to straighten our hair with hot combs. I don't know if you can relate with that, but I know many people can.
Yeah.
Yes. And sometimes when we would wear our hair, we would have those curly hair pieces, so that, which came back in style. So it's very interesting that there seems to be this fusion between the Eurocentric standards and the cultural presentation of many of our Black sisters. But at the same time, you also have certain, for example, some African countries, they already have certain types of hair that don't have kinks in them, so it's quite a multi-dynamic topic when you're talking about hair and culture and identity. And I better let you keep asking questions, otherwise I'm going to just keep talking.
How do you think societal beauty standards affect mental health?
So, at a very basic fundamental level, even if we're not talking about natural hair, if we're talking about a fashion trend with maybe a certain hairstyle, how we wear the hair, whether we cut the hair or we keep it long or straight, is central to so much more of the presentation of our bodies physically. So if we wear our hair a certain way, it may accentuate certain facial types or structures and give a certain look. So when we understand that, just using that as a fundamental example, as a basic example, it allows us to understand that primarily it is tied to our sense of self, body image, sense of body autonomy and agency, and also to a large extent, how a person feels like a part of a whole, a part of a group, acceptance, belonging, and to a large extent, a lot of definitions of value. Yes, it could be seen as quite superficial, but these are some of the societal expectations and standards of beauty that then informs our mental health. So when we think about it that way, it helps us to understand that when people feel that sense of body integration, they feel more capable, they feel more, they have that sense of belonging. They are able to be more productive. They feel more regulated. And we might ask the question about hair. And if I go back to my story, it's just hair. It's just hair. How could that inform so much more of that? So if we understand that identity is informed by several factors, and you're talking about physical factors, which is skin type, language, and we're also talking about aesthetics, so to speak. We may be talking about our clothes, the style, personal style, the culture, the food. So every part of that helps to shape that dimensionality of a human being. And of course, when you're now talking about mental health, when things are not aligned, when things become disorganized in our lives, say for example, people who talk about bad hair days, if you look at what tends to happen with that, there is this slow but steady and certain unfolding of a day that seems very disorganized, and as a result causes dysregulation in the body. And if you don't trace it back, you might like, oh, I didn't sleep well at night. Yes, that could be a factor, but it could just have to do with your hair. The fact that maybe you didn't have enough time to comb it, you haven't washed it for a while, it's itchy, you feel uncomfortable, self-conscious, everyone is looking at your hair, it's making you look some type of way. That definitely will impact on a person's mental health.
Yeah, that's quite deep. It's funny how, like, we tend to underestimate the power of hair on our mood and different aspects of our lives. So, wow. Okay. Many women, I would say, especially Black women, we've had that complicated relationship with our hair. You know, speaking of relaxers, wigs, all that pressure to conform. How do you see this playing out emotionally and mentally?
So, some of our social spaces really has a lot to do with our self-concept. We do get some of our self-concept from how people see us, how people perceive us, and how they receive or not receive us. And so when a person wears a certain look that feels like you fit in to the spaces that we occupy, then that person feels comfortable within themselves. They have that sense of belonging. They feel like they're part of a group. And when you feel like you're part of a group, then you don't worry so as much. But the moment you choose an identity that stands out, that bring attention to you, wanted and unwanted, and we know that the age we're in, there's a lot of vilification that people experience. For example, if you have any kind of exposure online, they just do a free for all, and they could be very, very nasty with their comments and their perceptions about you, and they don't hold back. And if you choose a certain look, a certain style, if you choose to stand in what you believe is some of your own authentic presence and power, people are going to resist that. And so at the end of the day, it's really important that this complicated relationship that we have to, as much as possible, understand at a fundamental level some of our core identities, and then choose to present, sometimes just for really practical reasons, because like we said, we have instances where a person might go to work, and because maybe as a Black woman, you wore your hair some type of way one day, and then the next couple of weeks you change the look, and then the next couple of weeks you choose not to have that hair anymore. People struggle with that. A lot of the spaces we're in, they struggle with that because they want you to conform and comply. And some of our own cultural ways of being, some of our identities are we belong to cultures that are bright and vibrant and beautiful and rich and robust. And the hair is one of the most prominent aspect of that. So can you imagine when that is taken away from a person, or when one is forced to comply and just fit in, when in reality it's meant to be a diverse space where people are able to identify to a large extent as authentically as they can.
So I guess as you talked about this, what I'm observing is that if for a person, for example, who loves their natural hair, maybe this might affect them, right? But if a person has grown up in a space whereby they don't necessarily care about their natural hair and they want the convenience, it might not necessarily affect them.
Yeah, well, it's more complex than that. Because
oh my God! Okay.
It's more complex, but you definitely are in a direction that is worth exploring more. But it's more complex than that, because hair is a prominent feature. It's a prominent physical feature. However, when one has to make decisions that are for exigencies, for practical purposes, for even personal safety. Because when a person does not feel safe in some of the spaces that they're in, they're going to do whatever they need for survival. At that point, it's not so much about beauty. It's so much about survival. It's more about safety. And that's what I mean by it's more complex than that. So we're always transiting. We move. We have developmental stages of life where when we were younger, the most important thing to us is to belong.
Yes.
is to feel like we're part of a group. It is so central to our wellness and our well-being as young people. But when we're much older, more matured, we may have a stronger sense of agency and a greater sense of autonomy in the spaces that we're in. Okay. So that's a factor as well.
Okay. So you did talk about what happens when people, or why people basically have to try to conform. But what are the consequences of having to conform, especially Black women in this case?
That's such an important question. Again, it is complex, but what we want to try and, as much as we can, always come back to is the ability of a person to feel aligned within their own body and to feel like they can be in spaces as themselves without having to perform, without having to pretend, without having to fawn for what is rightfully theirs. Their right to take space in the world, because they have been created with a level of presence, with a presence that is deserving to them. So can you imagine? It's like trying to fit yourself into compartments and boxes and tight spaces when you're meant to brim over, when you're meant to blossom and bloom, when you're meant to thrive, when you're meant to flourish. But you're needing to be contained because that is what is socially acceptable, because that is what is understood to be correct. And we're talking about a very Eurocentric, very supposed conformity of rightness, or should we say whiteness? Because at the end of the day, when you think about it, you will see just how much the impact of Eurocentric beauty standards cuts across the world. We're not just talking about Black women. We're talking about how people would constantly want to lighten their skin color, or, you know, for us too, we would code switch in our language. We would, you know, perform in a certain way that is considered the cultured way. So because of it, what we're constantly under is this push-pull, often hyper vigilant states that we're in. And what that does to the nervous system is that we're in this constant state of dysregulation because we're always watchful. Am I sitting right? Am I talking right? Is my hair sitting right? Does it look okay? Are they going to complain about it? Do I need to shrink a little bit so that my light does not shine too bright? So the body is in that state of watchfulness and hyper awareness, and so that's not good for the nervous system, because what then happens is that the body system is always in a trauma response mode. It does not relax, doesn't feel comfortable within itself. So those are the major consequences of that. And at the end of the day, it's really there's a level of emotional intelligence that is required to navigate this complexity. But what is important, like I started out with, is coming back to that sense of self. That, talk about authenticity, it can feel very airy-fairy at times. It just feels, what does authenticity mean? But at the end of the day, what we're trying to come back to is something that allows one to feel somewhat complete without needing to put something on to make them feel complete. That's really important.
Wow, man, the consequences of conformity, man. We don't talk about it, especially when it comes to something like hair, but it's heavy. So I also wanted to ask this question. I'm just curious. Is there such a thing as hair grief? Like, when you expect your hair to look one way and it doesn't.
Okay. I would say there is, because grief is a human experience that sometimes we tend to think it only has to do with things like loss of life, or sometimes maybe associated with loss of a major thing. whatever that might be to that person. But when you talk about hair, it can seem rather privileged or frivolous to say, oh, so my hairstyle didn't turn out the way I want, so I'm grieving it. People will be like, yeah, that's just that's just a personal problem. I haven't eaten and you're telling me to grieve over my hairstyle. But in reality, the hair grief that a person might experience is when you peel back the layers, it's not so much about the hairstyle. It's more to do with our expectations and the fact that those expectations weren't met. It's to do with the context that the hairstyle was meant to be, done or created. For example, I have a hairstyle that I want to use, and the hairstyle doesn't turn out that way. It can literally affect my whole emotional state the whole time. So there can be grief, and there can be kind of grief that comes with the loss of hair, whether it is how we've always worn our hair in a certain way. For example, if I keep locks, I've kept locks for several years, and then I take the locks off, and I now have a low cut hair. There can be grief because the locks have been part of my hair identity for however long that person has worn. And also, if people have known you with the locks, when you change the hairstyle, it actually can impact the way people then relate and respond to you. And for a long time, people might be saying, oh, you look so different. So that's the grief. You look so different. Oh, those locks made your face some type of way. You will miss that. Maybe the locks, you use them to sort of cover some facial defect, or it made you just not let people see you, or it did something for you. So when you change it, it definitely can bring some grief because there is an element of loss there. And sometimes the grief will come from that familiarity that is now missing, the uncertainty of what is to come. And again, it might feel like, okay, that's just privilege talking. But when we go on our own personal journeys, and again, if I go back to that story of when I started wearing the hijab, that day, again, I've written about this, but that day, the day I decided I was going to put the hijab on, which is the scarf, I remember I just made my hair into this beautiful style. I was so proud of my hair. And I was not going to put anything on it. But then I decided I would. Yeah. I felt like there was a personal victory there, but I also felt a sense of loss because now my identity was changing, not because my hair is lost, but that my look, the fact that it's now going to be covered, that was a big deal for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned, because I think I also experienced quote unquote hair grief when I decided to wear the hijab, but I didn't know that was what I was experiencing. So I used to rock the biggest weaves, the longest braids, the straightest weaves. I even rocked like a mohawk at one point in time. When I was
that would have been a sight to see.
Yeah, I was in my punk phase. I don't know what I was going through then. I didn't even understand it. But I remember when I decided to wear the hijab, it was I was like, I'm going to do this. And for me, it was gradual. I pulled my hijab like midway across my head. I still left some hair out. It took a friend that actually just pulled it from me, and I felt, oh, you're doing this.
That's literally what I did too. I had this tiny scarf that was like a bandana, and I was feeling pretty cool with myself, and I tied it, and then I combed out a few of my fringe just in front, feeling pretty cool with myself. Then eventually I was like, no, not gonna happen. You can't keep any fringe out. You have to cover the whole hair.
Yes. It's interesting, those little moments that it's easy to just ignore because people feel, oh, like you don't have any major issues, but it does affect us. It does.
And I'll also say that the other hair grief would have to do with people who have serious medical conditions that involves hair loss.
Yeah.
Sometimes it may not be medical conditions in their later years or anything. It may even be that they weren't born with a lot of hair. And if they're amongst people with a lot of hair, maybe they come from a family of people with hair, or they have friends with lots of hair, or people are talking about hair problems. They don't have that to talk about. So there's a lot of grief associated with that. And then there's, of course, what I mentioned earlier, which is, people who lose their hair in one way or the other.
Speaking of solutions, can hair routines serve as a grounding technique for mental health?
Oh, for sure. From a sensory aspect, one very important mindfulness practice is actually to be in the present moment and experience things sensorily. So touching your head, massaging the scalp, combing your hair are all self-care routines that actually help a person to feel more settled. They are very soothing practices, and they help a person feel more regulated. Now, if in the moment a person, for example, might be having an anxiety episode or a panic attack, that might not be the best thing to be doing in that moment, because it's a very sensitive part of the body. However, for some people, it could actually help. So something like a safe touch. So if a person is experiencing an anxiety episode, for example, and they are with someone who has a safe touch. What I mean a safe touch is they trust the person, they're comfortable with the person, and the person holds their head and gently massages. It actually helps to soothe the body as well, and helps the body to find some degree of regulation. Now, as a regular practice, as part of any physical care,
tip loading.
I would highly recommend, obviously depending on the kind of hairstyle that you're wearing, that as much as possible, when we're able to, that when we get into the shower, that we allow water to run from the top of our heads to the whole of our bodies. And what that does is to the whole of our body. And what that does is that, again, it helps the nervous system to feel more regulated. And what it also does is that if you start that as a practice at the beginning of the day, your body is calmer, you feel more settled, you're able to go about some of your activities, being able to feel more settled. Now, if the hairstyle you have on won't allow you to be pouring water on your hair, at least when you're able to wash the hair, even if it's once a week or once in 2 weeks or something, but regular washing of hair is actually really important. The water touches your head, the hand massages the scalp, your hair becomes aerated, you feel more settled, it's cleaner, it's, you're styling it. So with the impact it has on us, when we schedule actual routines for our regular routines, we have specific things that we do that's very important. The hair is one of it, and that could be in the morning, parting the hair in place, combing it through, oiling it, the attention that we pay, but the mindfulness attention. So not just a quick, hurried, oh, I look okay in the mirror and you're rushing out. No, actually mindfully. So every action that you're taking is preparing your body for the action you're about to take, whether it is leaving the house, whether it is stepping out of your room. That in and of itself teaches the body to have this expectation of normality, something that you are doing every day. It also allows the body to feel like it knows what it's coming. So if it's a regular routine that you're engaging in, the body is now ready for the next thing, as opposed to just sort of random kind of actions that we're taking that keeps your body guessing and unsettled and unsure. The other thing that is helpful with hair is definitely pay attention to your hair products. Definitely pay attention to some of the ingredients in the hair products. Some ingredients actually penetrate the scalp and has an effect on our hormones.
Yeah.
Some ingredients actually could stimulate us in a way that we would just be wondering, why am I bouncing off the walls? But in actual fact, it's because you've gone and used certain hair products that may have actually stimulated some of your hormonal system in a way that is not healthy for you.
So we're going to start trying to round up now. I have another question for you. A couple. I guess my question is, what's one lesson from therapy that you think applies to hair care?
I think people will often coin ideas and thoughts into one thing or the other. And because of it, at times, I think it tends to limit our ability to just explore these ideas within the context of our own lives, as well as how meaningful they are. So one of such is this idea of body positivity. For me, it's not so much about positive or negative. It's really more about something I said a little bit earlier, which is having this sense of self and the right to feel present in life, and the fact that every single part of our body given to us is given to us to value. And if there's a lesson hair teaches, it teaches us that we can have agency. It teaches us that we can have a level of body autonomy, because of course when you change styles and you decide whether you want to keep the hair or not, there is some of that autonomy that is not driven by just societal standards and the idea that you can only have one look, or you must only be able to wear your hair in one single way. The other lesson is really understanding that every part of our body invites connection, invites reflection. So, and the other thing with hair is that we can become very complacent about some of our own privileges without understanding that at the end of the day, just having hair in and of itself is a privilege for some people, because some people don't have that. So the lessons to draw from that is to value what we do have and to be creative as well.
Wow, that's beautiful. I also wanted to ask you, what's the worst hair advice you've ever gotten?
That one would take some time to think about, but I would say I would say it's really me going back to natural hair, and then maybe someone suggesting just go back and do such and such. Okay, I remember now, I went to a salon and I wanted to do something to my hair, and the person who was making my hair, who was a white person, she didn't even understand my hair, but I needed some attention, so I didn't have a choice. I had to go there. Was just telling me, don't do this particular. There was a particular thing I wanted to do to my hair because your face looks much better. I didn't agree, because I felt like, again, the Eurocentric compliance was in place at that time, and I just said no, that's not the style that I want. And they were quite disappointed, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, okay. Building on that, what is one product you can't live without? One hair care product?
I'd say just the basic hair moisturizing cream. Something that keeps my hair moisturized, and just anything to ensure that it's not dry. It's nice and moisturized. And I have to say that I've had the privilege of using Eidara's hair shampoo bar, and pretty phenomenal stuff, I have to say. Looking forward to more products.
Thank you so much for that plug, Sister Summayyah.
I couldn't resist it. I had to just quickly throw that in.
Thank you. The Eidara shampoo bar is amazing. It doesn't dry out your hair, and it makes it super defined, which I absolutely love. Which I also absolutely love. Yes. So, Sister Summayyah, I just have to wrap things up with you today. As much as I don't want to let you go, because trust me, I have more questions, but maybe we can do this again. But thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the podcast. We really appreciate you, Sister Summayyah. And on behalf of the Unraveling the Knots community, I want to share a big thank you and wish you more success on your journey of helping people understand themselves better. But before we go, where can people find you?
Now I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and I have a website as well, and Instagram as well. So you can find me there.
And what is your Instagram handle for most of us that are like Instagram savvy?
I know, it's Summayyah Sadiq.
Okay.
It's Summayyah Sadiq. So it's pretty, SUMMDAYHSADIQ. You find me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sister Summayyah. Again, your work is super impactful, and we're grateful for the wisdom you've shared with us today. Do take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Unraveling the Knots. Today, we explore the deep connection between our hair and how we see ourselves. We also uncovered emotional ties, personal journeys, and self-discovery that come with embracing our natural hair. If you found this episode helpful, insightful, or just plain entertaining, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your friends, fellow natural hair lovers, and anyone who's on their hair journey. Got questions or ideas about natural hair? We'd love to hear from you. Send us a DM on social media at UTK Podcast or email us at utkinhair@gmail.com. And of course, don't forget to follow us at UTK Podcast on Instagram to stay in the loop with trending hairstyles, tips, and all things natural hair. Till next time, remember, your hair is a part of you and you're always beautiful. Bye for now.